Hello, everybody. Welcome to our noon webinar. I'm going to stall for just a moment to make sure everybody can make it in from the waiting room. But it looks like you're all here. So welcome everybody to our webinar today about how you can save with an electric car in Massachusetts. My name is Anna Vanderspek. I'm our electric vehicle program director, and I'm the one who will be giving this presentation today. And I'll let my colleague introduce himself.
Hello, my name's Elias. I'm the Drive Green intern with the Green Energy Consumers. It's nice to meet you all.
So before we get started, I just want to read through this little disclosure that we are recording this webinar and we will make the video and audio available on our YouTube channel so that people who missed the sort of live recording can watch it. So we just want to make sure all attendees are aware of that. I'll also go over some Zoom basics. All attendees will be muted throughout the webinar, but we will absolutely answer your question, and we encourage you to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen to ask questions. Elias will be checking the questions and responding in text as needed, or we'll call them out at the end of the presentation and go over them together. As I said, the webinar is recorded and will be sent as in a follow-up email along with any resources we talk about today. And if you'd like to use closed captions, you can click CC at the bottom of your screen to do that. But with that, I'll properly introduce us. So Elias and I both work for Green Energy Consumers Alliance. We are a nonprofit organization based in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, and our mission is to empower consumers and communities to speed a just transition to a zero carbon world. We run different programs and services that people can take advantage of to make the switch to various clean energy technologies. And we also do public policy advocacy work, but a lot of our work focuses on education, and that's what we're focusing on today with electric vehicles. This webinar is brought to you through the MOR-EV program in Massachusetts. So the Department of Energy Resources in Massachusetts, DOER, has partnered with another nonprofit called the Center for Sustainable Energy to administer the state MOR-EV program, which is the state rebate for electric vehicles. We have partnered with the Center for Sustainable Energy to make webinars like the one that we're holding today possible and available to people across the state. So all of what we're doing today really relates to that MOR-EV rebate, and we'll go through that rebate in more detail later in this presentation. So today we're going to talk about the financial benefits of driving electric. We'll talk about the environmental benefits. We'll talk about that state rebate, MOR-EV, for both new and used electric vehicles. And then we'll spend some time on charging basics and some EV buying tips, because we know that lots of people have questions about those things. So with that, we'll jump right in. First, though, I want to be clear that when we're talking about electric vehicles, I want to make sure we are all on the same page about what we're talking about. So we're mostly today going to be talking about battery electric vehicles, which are sometimes referred to as BEVs. These are fully battery powered. They don't have any tailpipe emissions. The range is somewhere between 60 and 400 plus miles. 60 is really outdated. Those are the sort of oldest used EVs you might find on the road. Modern EVs now mostly have at least 250 miles per charge, with many with even longer ranges. And in terms of charging, we'll talk about this later, but if you charge at level 2, it'll take you somewhere between 4 and 10 hours to fully charge your EV if you're starting at 0%. But as we'll talk about later, you very rarely start at 0%. There are also things called plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, or PHEVs. These are vehicles that have both a gas engine and a small battery that you can charge from an external electricity source. The range of these vehicles is generally somewhere between 150 and 500 or 600 miles, with somewhere between 25 and 53 of those miles being on electricity and then the rest being gas. These vehicles charge faster because they have much smaller batteries, so it just takes less long to charge them. And there used to be a lot more plug-in hybrid electric vehicle options out there. Right now, there aren't as many as there used to be, but there are still plenty on the used market. and many people are a fan of this sort of transition vehicle. Lastly, I do want to mention hybrid electric vehicles because sometimes people assume that when we're talking about electric vehicles that we're including hybrid vehicles. Hybrid vehicles are gas vehicles that have an electric motor that is charged only through the gasoline engine or a technology called regenerative braking. In other words, these are not vehicles that you can plug into an external power source. These have been around for a long time. Many of us are very familiar with them. I'm putting this here to basically remind myself to say that we're not talking about hybrid vehicles today. We're only talking about vehicles with a plug. And specifically, we're mostly talking about these battery electric vehicles because those are the only ones that are eligible for the state rebate that we'll be talking about today. But I just want to make sure everybody has these different types of vehicles in their heads before we move forward. But now we'll talk about the financial benefits of electric vehicles. So first, we'll talk about upfront costs. We are living in a very strange time where everything is getting much more expensive very quickly. And recently, we hit a new high that the average price of a new car sold in the United States is above $50,000. That's across all vehicle types, not just electric, mostly gas. That is a new record for sure. And with that context, it's important to note that there are many electric vehicle models that have a starting price well below $50,000. Generally, it starts in the 20,000s. There's options in the 30,000s and 40,000s, which is still a lot of money, but less than that $50,000 average new car price in the US. Then in addition, it's important to remember that the used car market exists and is growing for electric vehicles. As of the first quarter of this year, the average cost of a used EV was somewhere between $20,000 and $30,000, but there are less expensive models available too. It depends a little bit, obviously, on what you're looking for. Then finally, or not finally, but we're going to spend a lot of time today talking about how the state rebate can bring those upfront costs down even further. And then, of course, with an EV, you can save on fuel and maintenance costs as well, which we'll talk about in the upcoming slides. But long story short, for this slide, I just want to stress that there are a lot more options at a lot of different price points than there used to be, and they are very competitive with the cost of a new gas car these days in the United States. Talking about fuel costs, this is definitely a particularly salient topic right now as gas prices have gone way up. In general, driving a mile on electricity in an EV is cheaper than driving a mile on gas in a gas car, but your savings depends on where you charge and the charging level and what you're comparing to. In general, charging your vehicle at home is cheaper than charging at a public station. If you charge at home, you're going to pay per kilowatt hour the same that you would for any electricity used by your fridge or lights or your laptop or anything. And so you know what that price is. When you go look in public, many places charge roughly the cost of electricity, but a lot of them add a little bit of a markup so that they can cover their own operations and maintenance costs. But there still are some free charging stations out there, and we'll talk about how to find charging stations as well. But long story short, if you are able to charge at home, that is likely that your cheapest option. If you're out in public, charging at a level 2 charger is generally cheaper than charging at a DC fast charger. We'll go through the different types of charging a little later, but level 2 is slower than DC fast charging, and therefore it's a little bit cheaper. And then Eversource and National Grid and many of the municipal light plants that serve residents across Massachusetts have incentives to help cover the costs of installing a charger at home, even for multifamily homes. So if you're concerned about the cost of installing a charger, there's help from your electric utility there. Again, particularly right now, I'm sure people are really curious about how to calculate your savings. So we have two resources that we want to point you to on this front. The first is a resource produced by another nonprofit called Cultura. And this group tracks average fuel savings by state over time, and they've been doing this for a while. there's a typo in this slide. Sorry, this is the Massachusetts data just from 2026, not 2022. But what you can see on the screenshot that we took from their website is that as of June 1st, if you drive an EV in Massachusetts, you're likely saving about 7 cents per mile based on current electricity and current gas prices. You can see that the war in the Middle East has dramatically increased the savings of driving an EV because gas prices have gone up and electricity prices have not changed that much. So you can see that earlier this year, we were closer to 2 cents a mile. Now we're up to 8 cents a mile. You can go to this website and we'll share the link when we share the slides, and you can look at an even longer time span. So you can see going back many years how gas and electricity prices have changed over time and what that's meant for the average EV driver. If you want to get more specific, though, we recommend this resource called Choose EV, where you can estimate exactly what you might save with your current vehicle and your EV of choice. So on the screenshot, you can see that it shows you, okay, assuming you have $5.55 to drive and you can adjust what number you're putting in, how far will a gas car go and how far will an EV go? So for this sort of base assumption from Choose EV, they're assuming that gas is $5.55, that your gas vehicle gets 24 miles per gallon. And they're assuming an electric vehicle that has an efficiency of 3.07 miles per kilowatt hour and a utility kilowatt hour rate of 18 cents per kilowatt hour. It's a little low for our region, but the beauty of this website is that you can choose a specific gas vehicle and a specific EV, and you can input your own local gas price and your own utility price per kilowatt hour, and it will adjust and it will show you how much further you could drive on an EV for the amount of money you would spend on 1 gallon of gasoline. So definitely recommend playing around with this tool and plugging in the current vehicle that you drive and then a couple different EVs that you might be considering so you can look at that savings potential sort of in real time. Fuel costs aren't, oops, nope, sorry. I was jumping to a different slide in my head. As I mentioned, charging at home is less expensive than charging at a public charging station. But in addition to just that fact, there are what are called managed charging programs available from our electric utilities across Massachusetts. A managed charging program is a program where, as a driver, you get incentivized to charge your electric vehicle during off-peak hours, so during times of the day when demand is really low. And these programs make a lot of sense because they shift your demand to the least expensive and least polluting times of day. So everybody benefits if our electric vehicle fleet basically charges up during these off-peak hours. So these programs make sense for you, the driver, because you save a little bit on your electricity, but they also make sense for your neighbors who don't have electric vehicles because they're reducing costs for everyone. National Grid has what's called an off-peak charging rebate program, where if you sign up, you get a $50 enrollment incentive. And then for your charging that happens off-peak, during the winter, you save 3 cents per kilowatt hour. And in the summer, you save 5 cents per kilowatt hour. Eversource has a slightly different structure for their program. You also get a $50 enrollment incentive, but then you get a $10 monthly reward if you do the majority. I think it's over 90% of your charging off-peak. So if you're a National Grid or Eversource customer, definitely keep that in mind. That can further bring down your electricity costs. If you are a resident of a municipal light plant or another electric utility, you may very well have a program like this too, and we recommend you look at your utility's website for more information. So public charging costs. The cost to charge in public depend on lots of different factors. If we're looking at the country as a whole, they depend on what the actual electricity rates are locally. In some places, there are time of use rates, so it matters what time you're charging. And it also just matters how the site host has set it up. There might be a fee for staying at the station too long, or maybe there's a fee to park or something like that. This company, Perrin, does a quarterly review of pricing at all DC fast charging stations. So these are the super high powered charging stations that you would use if you're going on a road trip, for example. Would not really use them daily or even weekly, but would use them when you really need to get a lot of power fast. As of the first quarter of this year, the average cost to charge at a DC fast charging station in Massachusetts was 54 cents a kilowatt hour. Apologies for another typo. You can see how that compares to different parts of the country. It's lower than California, which is striking, but it's higher than other parts of the country where electricity prices are a little bit lower. So in general, we're kind of middle of the pack, which is not bad considering that on the whole, our electricity prices are a lot higher in New England than other parts of the country. 54 cents a kilowatt hour might sound really intimidating. I just want to stress again that level 2 charging, which is the slower type of charging and the charging that you would use more frequently, is cheaper. And we'll show you how to find the prices of that in just a moment. But first, I want to talk about maintenance costs because that is the other piece of the lower operating costs for drivers. There's a couple different resources that try to illustrate what you might expect with lower maintenance costs, so we'll go through those. First, Consumer Reports did a study at this point many years ago, but it's still really useful because they followed several thousand real-life EV drivers and cataloged what their actual maintenance and repair costs were over the life of the vehicle. And what they found is that over the life of the vehicle, drivers can expect to have to save about half the maintenance costs of comparable gas cars. So at the time when they did the study, that amounted to about $4,600. Now prices have gone up, so I think that number would go up a little bit, but the sort of figure of save about half or cut your maintenance costs in half compared to a gas car, I think is a good rule of thumb. This here is a somewhat busy but still useful graph from the Department of Energy that shows you the scheduled maintenance costs for different types of light duty vehicles. So each column is a different type of vehicle. On the left, we've got internal combustion engine vehicles, ICE vehicles, which is basically gas cars. Then you've got hybrid electric vehicles, plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, and battery electric vehicles. And it's all been standardized, so you see the maintenance costs per mile. So you can see that as you move from left to right, from gas to electric, the maintenance costs per mile go down dramatically. And there's two reasons for that. One is there's a whole class of types of maintenance costs that you just don't need to worry about for a battery electric vehicle. So these are the costs in red at the top of the columns: transmission service, spark plugs, oxygen sensors, timing belts, fuel filters, engine air filters, oil filters. None of that exists in a battery electric vehicle, so those are costs you never have to worry about. In addition, even for some of the costs that the different vehicle types have in common, they are lower for battery electric vehicles. And the best example of that is brake pads, which is the sort of dark brown slice above the gray. Electric vehicles use a technology that I've already mentioned once called regenerative braking, which is basically a technology where if you take your foot off of the accelerator and have regenerative braking turned on, the car will recognize that you want to slow down. And instead of just sort of coasting and slowing down with normal friction, it will basically spin magnets around the vehicles backwards to slow the vehicle down, but crucially to store that energy, to capture that energy, store it, and put it back into the battery. So when you use regenerative braking, two things happen. One is you get energy back, put back into your battery, which will increase your available range. But they also crucially means that you don't use your friction pads as frequently, your actual friction brake pads, so you don't need to replace those as frequently. So that's an example of, okay, you don't have to replace your brake pads as frequently, so those costs come down. And then finally, Cultura, the nonprofit I already mentioned, calculates that maintenance savings are about 3 cents per mile driven. The New York Times also has a tool They calculate the maintenance savings as about 4 cents a mile. So that gives you another way of sort of thinking about what you might expect to save depending on how many miles you drive in a year. So together, fuel and maintenance costs in general together are lower for electric vehicles than for gas cars. I'll talk about the environmental benefits briefly, and then we'll talk more about charging. So first things first, we are big fans of electric vehicles because they produce less climate pollution. So the transportation sector is the largest sector of greenhouse gas emissions in Massachusetts. It's a sector that has not been really reducing emissions noticeably yet. So it's a sector that we really need to work on to meet our climate requirements. Electric vehicles are noticeably cleaner, both on a per mile basis and on a life cycle basis. So even if you take into account the production of the vehicles and the batteries. We have lots of information about this on our website, but to just illustrate this really quickly, I want to show this screenshot on the bottom right, which is from the Union of Concerned Scientists EV emissions tool. This is a really cool tool where you can input your zip code and choose a particular vehicle, and it will show you how much cleaner it is than comparable gas vehicles, using information about the actual mix of electricity generators on the grid in the area that you live. So we put in a Massachusetts zip code here and chose the Chevy Equinox EV. You'll see at the bottom that on average, a gas truck or SUV, which is the class that this vehicle falls into, gets about 22 miles per gallon. And what the figure above is showing you is to be as clean per mile as a Chevy Equinox EV, a gas truck or SUV would have to get 132 miles per gallon. That's how efficient a gas car would have to be as clean as this Equinox, which is insane. We've been working on internal combustion engines for over 100 years at this point and have not gotten anywhere near an engine that gets 132 miles per gallon. So that's just an indication of how much cleaner these vehicles are, and they're getting cleaner over time as we're adding more renewable energy to our electric grid. So both on a per mile and life cycle basis, the electric vehicles are a lot cleaner than gas vehicles. We obviously talk a lot about climate, but I don't want to forget public health because there are huge public health benefits of electric vehicles. EVs produce less of the pollutants that harm human health, particularly particulate matter, which are just very fine particles that come both from combustion and also from tire wear and brake wear. EVs produce less of these pollutants than gas and diesel vehicles. If you look at maps of where air pollution from fossil fuel vehicles is worse, it's very clearly low-income communities and communities of color. That's true across the country. It's also true in Massachusetts. And then if you also look at maps of the health impacts of bad air quality, those are worse in the same communities. So the places where there's the most particulate matter pollution from vehicles are also the places where there's a disproportionately high rate of asthma or emergency room visits related to asthma or things like that. So it's very clearly a public health, but also an equity issue to clean up our air and reduce these public health impacts. If you're curious about this, we really recommend reading up the reports from the American Lung Association. The ALA has written a report every year for the last several years that estimates, okay, if we were to fully electrify the fleet of vehicles, what would that look like? What would we see in terms of healthcare costs? And the last report that we cite here said that full electrification by 2050 would generate 1.2 trillion US dollars in public health benefits. So the public health case for electrification, I think, is very strong. Now, though, we'll move on to talk about the actual rebate in Massachusetts, the MOR-EV rebate for both new and used electric vehicles. So MOR-EV, as I mentioned, is the Massachusetts State Rebate Program for Electric Vehicles. It stands for Massachusetts Offers Rebates for Electric Vehicles. And it is available for battery electric vehicles or fuel cell electric vehicles, which are a different type of electric vehicle that is charged with hydrogen fuel instead of electricity from a plug. We don't spend a lot of time talking about fuel cell electric vehicles because there aren't very many charging stations or refueling stations for these vehicles at all. So we really focus on the battery electric vehicles. MOR-EV offers several different sort of sub-programs that we'll go over in more detail on the next slide as well. There are two base rebates. One is for new vehicles, $3,500. One is for used vehicles, also $3,500. And then there are additional rebates that you can stack on top of those if you qualify. MOR-EV Plus is a income qualifying adder, and MOR-EV trade-in is an adder that if you are trading in an eligible, very old gas-powered car, you can get an additional $1,000 from the state as you're purchasing your electric vehicle. And then if you're purchasing an electric pickup truck or other vehicle that falls into Class 2B, the rebate is a little higher. It's at $7,500. For, excuse me, for MOR-EV Standard, MOR-EV Used, and MOR-EV Plus, you can get that incentive right at the dealership at the point of sale if you're purchasing from a dealership that is participating in that program. But on the next slide, we're just going to go through each of these one by one. So MOR-EV Standard is for new light-duty vehicles. The rebate amount is $3,500. It's available to Massachusetts residents, businesses, and nonprofit organizations. It's available for the purchase or lease of an eligible new vehicle. The vehicle cost has to be under $55,000 for it to qualify. And this is available both at the point of sale at a participating dealership and post-purchase. If you purchase a vehicle and then fill out the application online afterwards and receive a check in the mail. MOR-EV Used is the next line down. This is for used light-duty vehicles. This is available only to income qualifying Massachusetts residents. And if you go to the MOR-EV website, you can fill out a form to see if you qualify. The amount is $3,500. It's available for the purchase or lease of used battery electric vehicles that cost less than $40,000. This is also available post-purchase or at the point of sale, but if you want to receive it at the point of sale, you first have to fill out the application online to prove your eligibility, and then you get a voucher from the program that you can bring to a participating dealership. Moving on to MOR-EV Plus. MOR-EV Plus is this additional program or additional rebate, excuse me, that you can add on if you are determined to be low income using the income qualification rules that they have on the website. So if you are low income, you can add that $1,500 rebate to the $3,500 of either MOR-EV Standard or MOR-EV Used to get a $5,000 rebate in total. This is similar to MOR-EV Used in that you can get it at the point of sale as long as you filled out that eligibility application first and received that voucher, or you can get it post-purchase by filling out a form online after you've bought your vehicle or leased your vehicle. Then MOR-EV Trucks exists for pickups and Class 2B vehicles. That's the $7,500 rebate. It's available to Massachusetts residents, but also businesses, nonprofits, educational institutions, and public entities. This one is not available at the point of sale. It's only available post-purchase, but it is available. And then just in case there's any folks on here that operate fleets that have vehicles that are in higher vehicle weight classes, so class 3 through 8, there are also incentives for medium and heavy duty battery electric and fuel cell vehicles. And the amount of those incentives depends on the class. So long story short, you've got MOR-EV Standard, MOR-EV Used, and then you can add on MOR-EV Plus or the MOR-EV Trade-in that I'd mentioned previously. And MOR-EV Trucks exists for pickups and other heavier vehicles. At this point, often people have questions about charging. So I'm just going to quickly cover the different types of charging. We've talked about level 2 in DC fast charging so far, but the the slowest type of charging that is actually a good fit for some people is called level 1 charging. It adds about 4 miles of range per hour spent charging. It's when you take a cord that you get and just plug it into a normal 120-volt outlet, same type of outlet you might plug your cell phone or a computer into. This works for people who don't drive too many miles and are able to charge up at home. So for example, if you drive 30 or 40 miles in a day, but are able to charge up overnight for 10 hours, you can replenish those 40 miles that you use every day just by plugging in with a level 1 charge. You might also sometimes hear this referred to as a trickle charge because it's the slowest type of charging. Level 2 is the next step up. It is considerably faster than level 1. You can install this at home, and we have a guide on our website on how to do that, but you'll also find this at public locations or at workplaces. It adds about, here we say 14 to 35 miles per hour of charging. Honestly, there are some that charge even faster than that. And you have basically two options if you want to do this at home. You can either install a wall-mounted unit. You need a 240-volt outlet. Either way, it's the same type of outlet you'd have for an all-electric dryer or washing machine. Or you can get what's called a portable charging unit, which you can plug in, but then also unplug and take with you because it's not mounted to your wall. There's pros and cons of each of those, and we've got more information about that in our charging guide. And then finally, we've got DC fast charging. DC fast charging is also called level 3 charging sometimes, or quick charging, or supercharging. It's the fastest type of charging. It is what you would use when you're going on a road trip. The general rule of thumb that we use is that it replenishes. It can get you from like 20% full to 80% full in less than half an hour. The range per hour of charge that we have here is quite conservative, actually. So 100 miles in 30 minutes is what some of the older, slower charging vehicles do. There are vehicles now that can do that in 12 minutes or even less. So what we recommend is, as you're shopping, if it's really important for you to be able to charge quickly, make sure to pay attention to the rating of the vehicle to see how quickly it can take power in. So you'll see a kilowatt rating for DC fast charging. And you can pay attention to that if this is a feature that's really important to you. DC fast charging uses 480-volt three-phase power. This is not something you can install at home. This is this type of charging that you'll see at rest stops along the highway or a Walmart or something like that. It's a more industrial use, but it is useful for road trips. There are a couple of different types of charging ports that we want to go over, but the good news and the big takeaway is that there are adapters that you can use to transition between or translate between these different types of charging ports. For level 1 and level 2 charging, there are two standards. There's the J1772, which looks like this. This used to be standard for all non-Tesla vehicles, but at this point, we have a new standard, which is NACS, which stands for the North American Charging Standard. It used to be the Tesla sort of proprietary standard, but now it's open to other automakers, and the US auto market, or the North American auto market, is shifting towards NACS. So most new vehicles are being built with the NACS port built in. For DC fast charging, it's a little bit more complicated. Historically, we've had the CCS standard. This used to be the standard for American and European automakers. There's also CHAdeMO, which used to be the standard for Asian automakers. And again, we have NACS, which used to be the Tesla standard, but is now open to other automakers. The industry as a whole is converging on this NACS standard, which is really good news because it will simplify the charging experience. You won't have to worry in the future about whether the vehicle you're driving has the right port for the charging station that you're going to use, because everybody's converging on this NACS standard. For the next couple of years, we're kind of in this in-between space where some people are still driving older vehicles that have a CCS or a CHAdeMO or a J1772 port. The good news is most charging stations, particularly most DC fast charging stations, have cords for more than one port type, and you can purchase adapters. So if you drive a vehicle that has a CCS port, you can purchase an adapter so you're able to use NACS chargers and vice versa. So this is a little bit of a learning curve at the beginning, but once you know your vehicle and know how to find charging stations, it's pretty smooth after that. Speaking of finding charging stations, how do you do that? There are a couple different resources that we like to point to. The first is called PlugShare, and this screenshot on the right is an example of that. This is a crowdsourced resource where you can go in, type in any address, and see the charging stations that are around it. So in the screenshot, anything that's green is a level 2 charger. Anything that's orange is a DC fast charger. You can click on each one of those little flags when you're in the website or the app, and you can learn more about the charger. So you can see where exactly it is, what are the port types, what charging network operates it, what are the costs, all of that. Then if you want to be a little bit more advanced, there's another tool called a better route planner, where you can put in a starting point and an ending point and set your sort of filters or preferences in a certain way. So you can say, this is the vehicle that I'm driving and I'm starting at this % of charge, and it will map out the ideal route for you to travel. So it will tell you, okay, stop at this charging station for 20 minutes, then keep going, and then 3 hours later, stop at this other charging station for 12 minutes. It will optimize your charging route for you. And it's a really useful tool for longer road trips. These charging stations are all operated or at least hosted or shared by different charging network companies. So you might have heard the name ChargePoint or Electrify America or EVgo. There's a bunch of these companies, and each one also has their own app. A lot of their apps talk to each other, but once you start driving, and if there are certain charging stations you use more frequently, you'll know to download those apps and use those apps. But the nice thing about PlugShare and a better route planner is that they have all of them in one place, so you can start there. It is worth noting that many modern EVs also have the ability built in to like find charging stations. So if you're using the navigation in your vehicle, it will tell you like go charge here, go charge there. So that's also an option if you have one of the vehicles that has that functionality. And then Google Maps and Apple Maps both also now include EV chargers. So that's another way that you can find chargers near you. I will stay briefly on this slide because I mentioned earlier that National Grid and Eversource offer rebates for residential EV charging, both in single family and multifamily homes. The amount that you're eligible for depends on what type of vehicle, what type of home you live in, your location, and what electricity rate you're on. So again, we'll send out these slides later, and we encourage you to just go to your electric utilities website and check out the eligibility requirements there. But basically, if you are on the low income electricity rate, the R2 rate, then for a single family home, you can get up to $1,000 for any in-home electrical upgrades, and then up to $700 for the purchase of a charger. For 2 to 4 unit homes, you basically can get double that amount for the in-home infrastructure upgrades. And then this is just not applicable for buildings that are more than 5 units. If you live in an area that has been designated as an environmental justice community by the state of Massachusetts, you qualify for $1,000 for in-home upgrades or $2,000 if you live in a 2 to 4 unit home. Then if you live in a much bigger building that has more than 5 units, it's a different formula to determine what you're eligible for, but basically customer side and utility side infrastructure costs are covered up to 100%. And then there's a charger rebate depending on the type of environmental justice community you're in. If you live in one of those buildings, likely the best person to deal with all those details is the building manager. So if you are in that case and want resources on that, happy to share them. But then lastly, if you are neither on the low income rate nor live in an environmental justice community, then you get up to $700 for in-home infrastructure upgrades for single family homes, and up to $1,400 for in-home infrastructure upgrades for 2 to 4 unit homes. And then again, the slightly more complicated formula for larger buildings. So I hope that that was useful. Long story short, check your utilities website or reach out to us if you have any questions. And then finally, we just have a couple of EV buying tips. So as you're considering getting an EV, these are maybe obvious questions to ask yourself, but I think it's still useful to go through them. You want to ask yourself how much you drive in a typical day, whether you are able to charge at home, where there are chargers located near you or near places that you frequent, what is your budget? Do you care whether the vehicle you're looking for is new or used? Do you have a preference about leasing versus purchasing? And then, of course, are there any special deals on an EV offered near you? To help you with this, we have built a tool that we call our EV Finder. This is a tool where you can learn about new and used EV models. You can filter by type of vehicle, drivetrain, incentive eligibility, number of seats, towing capacity, lots of different things. So you can narrow down which vehicles meet your needs and your budget. You can sort by price or electric range. And then again, you can narrow down to your top preferred models. And then you can sign up for more information about EVs from our team. We have a quarterly newsletter that we send out with just the latest information on the EV market. When we send out these slides, I'll make sure to link to the EV Finder. And this is hyperlinked in the slides as well. And with that, I think we're going to move on to questions. And I have seen a couple pop up. So let me take a look. Okay, so we have one question from someone who really wants to get an electric vehicle, but it does not have the ability to charge at home because they live in a condo complex and it's taking a very long time to install charging. And the question is it really viable to live with an EV if you don't have a charger at home? I see that Elias has responded in text in the chat, but I think this is a useful question to bring up too. It is viable. You just have to do a little bit of research and figure out if it's viable for you. So a colleague of ours for many years lived in Jamaica Plain, did not have off-street parking, and so was not able to install a charger. But they made it work by going to a local grocery store that had EV charging and doing their grocery shopping there once a week and charging up while they were shopping. And that was enough for them for their driving habits. I would recommend that you look at PlugShare and see what's nearby, where you live or work or where you spend a lot of time, and figure out, okay, how many miles do you drive? How quickly could you charge there? We'd be happy to help with all of that, but long story short, it is possible, but it's definitely worth doing your homework in advance to make sure it is possible. The other thing I see is that you mentioned that you live in a condo. Massachusetts has a statewide law called the right to charge, which means that if you want to install a charger at your condo or in a historic district, for example, where you bear the costs, a condo association or a historic district, or the correct term is escaping me, can't forbid you without a good reason. So the right to charge law, there's information about it online, happy to share you, basically means that if you say, I would like to do this, a condo association has to respond within a reasonable amount of time and has to give a reasonable reason if they need to, for whatever reason, forbid it. So I think for a long time, there was a lot of nebulous sort of about who has the right to make that decision in a condo situation, but that right to charge law passed, I think, a year and a half ago, and is hopefully going to add a little clarity into that. Then there was a question about the MOR-EV trade-in, which the question was, is that additional $1,000 income qualified? And the answer is no. Anybody can qualify for that, but the vehicle itself that you are trading in has to meet certain eligibility requirements. So if you go to the MOR-EV website and click on eligibility, you'll see what those requirements are. I think I've answered all the questions. What I just realized is that I was supposed to launch a poll for you all to get your feedback. And I forgot to do that. So I'm going to try and do that now. And I would love it if you are all still online, if you don't mind responding to these questions here to give me a sense of what you learned today, how confident you feel with the content, and if you have any remaining questions or your sort of assessment of your interest of EVs. So please go ahead and fill out that poll. Maybe there's something not working because I'm not seeing any answers, so that's on me. I apologize. But I hope you all had a chance to learn something today. And if you have any questions, feel free to respond to the email that you'll get from us soon that has the slides and the recording and more information. But with that, I think we've reached the end of this webinar, and I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day. Take care.